Daily Rambam for Thursday, Gimel Kislev, Tavshin Pei Aleph, the 25th Perek Chamisha V'Esinim of Hilchos Shabbos. So yesterday, Perek Havdal, the Rambam concluded with an introduction to the concept of carrying muktzah on Shabbos, and the Rambam used his own explanations, as the Maggid Mishnah pointed out. The Rambam offered three original reasons. Number one, it shouldn't feel like a weekday, because if you're moving all your kalim around and moving rocks around, so then it doesn't feel very Shabbosdik. Number two, if you deal with kalim shemalachtan le'isser, then you might actually end up using them for the actual malacha. And number three, there are some people who never do any of the lamatas malachas. They avoid all work all the time. So what's Shabbos for them? So we need to come up with something that will make it even Shabbos for them. So that's why we went even further and came up with this.
In English, they call it you can be Shem Shabbos, but you violate the spirit of Shabbos.
Right, spirit of Shabbos. Yes, that's the more like the first reason.
Yeah.
Yes. So the Rambam is going to set out to explain these halachas. So we start off halacha aleph, and the Rambam introduces the concepts of kli shemalachta leheter and kli shemalachta le'isser. Halacha aleph, yesh kli shemalachta leheter. You have a utensil, an implement that's used for things that are allowed on Shabbos. V'hu kli shemuter lasis by b'Shabbos davar shenasalei. Its main use is something permitted on Shabbos. It's going kois, lishtes by a cup to drink, a bowl to eat, a regular kitchen knife for cutting meat and bread, and a hatchet that's used specifically for breaking open nuts, and anything like that. That's a kli shemalachta leheter. Maggid Mishnah points out that we specifically mean the type that's the kardim, or the kornus, depending on the gersa or whatever, specifically the one that's used for a goyzim, not one that's used for carpentry or things like that. That would be malachta le'isser, as we shall see. Halacha beis, v'yesh kli shemalachta le'isser. You have implements that are used specifically for things that are prohibited. V'hu kli she'asel lasis b'Shabbos davar shenasalei. You can't use it for its main purpose. A grinder, a mill. That would be teichen, so you can't use them for their main purpose. So what's the halacha? What's the din? Halacha gimel. Kol kli shemalachta leheter. So any such keli which can be used for its primary purpose on Shabbos, bin hoya shel eitz, shel cheres, shel even, shel matachas. The material doesn't matter whether it's wood or earthenware or stone or metal. Mutlatat le b'Shabbos. You're allowed to carry it. Bein mishalatz mishal kli. Bein letzedach mekaymai. Bein letzedach gufay. For all three things. So either for the purpose of the keli itself, you want to protect it, you want to move it to somewhere safer, or tzedach mekayme means you want to the space that it's occupying, you want to use that space, and the tzedach gufa means using it for its actual purpose. V'chol kli shemalachta le'isser, and if it's something that you can use for its primary purpose, so bein hoya shel eitz, shel cheres, shel avanim, shel matachas, again the four materials doesn't matter. Mutter l'tat le b'Shabbos, you still are allowed to carry it on Shabbos. Bein l'tzedach gufay, bein l'tzedach mekayme, to use it l'tzedach gufay for a permissible use, or if it's occupying space that you need. B'shvel atzmi shel kli asur. The whole big difference is that you're not allowed to carry it for its own sake, for its own safety, something like that. Examples: Dalid Ketzad, Metaltal hu esakara shel eitz lechel ba oy leishvim kayma oy kadesh leitiganev v'zehu b'shvel atzmai. So if you have a wooden bowl, you can either use it to eat, that's l'tzedach gufay, or to sit where the bowl is, that's l'tzedach mekayme, or that doesn't get stolen. And the Rambam himself says v'zehu b'shvel atzmai. That example would be l'tzedach atzmai. Or if he took it out of the sun, so either you don't want to get stolen, or he took it out of the sun so it doesn't dry out and break, or he took it out of the rain so it doesn't swell and get ruined. And is it tilted b'shvel atzma? Also, these are all examples of b'shvel atzma umutter, and that's specifically mutter in this case because it's a bowl and you use it for eating. There's nothing wrong with it. You can do whatever you need to do. Now, before we continue, that the next halacha is going to be the examples of kli shemalachta le'isser. The Maggid Mishnah says, "V'da," note, pay attention from the Rambam Kumtois that she'ein letaltal shum kli shalei letzerach klal. Rambam didn't say you can move the kli shemalach leheter around no matter what. Rambam said for 3 reasons. Let's say gufay, and let's say mekaymai. What if it's for no reason at all? Sounds like from the Rambam, you would not be able to pick up a bowl for no reason. And Maggid Mishnah cites Rashba that who said clearly sheish lahachmash loitel kli l'tleitzayrach. And that seems to be the case from the Gemara. It says v'yesh mefarshim that are matir a kli shemalach leheter even for no tzayrach ve'ein lehem amashi yismeichu. The Maggid Mishnah says. Looking out at Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Ches, very long Siman that deals with these things. Sifta Zayin. So the Alter Rebbe says a kli shemalach leheter, which means you use it for something mutter on Shabbos. Kais, ka'ara, same examples. You're allowed to carry it even the tzayrach hakli atzmai, same examples. Avol shaloy l'tzayrach klal, the Alter Rebbe continues and says clearly it's also b'metaltel any keli, even if it's malach leheter. And Alter Rebbe explains because in the days of Nechemia ben Chachaliah, which the Maggid Mishnah mentioned yesterday, the story is that the Yidden in the time of Nechemia, when the Yidden had returned to Eretz Yisrael, to the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Yidden were not especially frum. They had various holes and flaws in their observance. And one of the problems was that they were not keeping Shabbos properly. They're being mezalzel. Like it says clearly in the Psukim, the Alter Rebbe quotes a bit of the Psukim. Look it up in Nechemia. So it says there, Zochre li alekai al zois. Hashem should remember the great things that I did. And he goes on to say, but Yom Mahema, in those days I saw in Yehuda, people were derchim gitais for Shabbos. They were pressing for juice on Shabbos. They were bringing bundles. They were loading it on the donkeys, wine, grapes, figs, all kinds of loads were being brought to Yerushalayim on Shabbos. And you had merchants that were bringing fish and stuff and selling it on Shabbos. The marketplace was open, business was booming. So Nechemia says he gathered the leaders and he said, "What's going on here? You're being machal Shabbos. This is what your ancestors did, and look what that ended up causing us. So we can't continue being machal Shabbos." So Nechemia says that he made sure to lock the gates of Yerushalayim before Shabbos, and they can't be open until after Shabbos, and he put people to watch. And the merchants came on Shabbos, and they were outside, and they tried to get in, and they couldn't get in. They said, "Okay, let's sleep overnight. Maybe we'll get in." And Nechemia confronted them and said, "Stop coming, go away." And from then on, they were able to keep Shabbos properly. So that's what the Psukim describe. But Chazal add, and they say, because the Mezal's on the Yisroim of Shabbos, so Chachamim made this siyag and this gather. And they said that all kelim, even malachtim leheter, the original gzeira was very far-reaching. Any keli, even malachtim leheter, you can't carry them at all, even for their unique use, except for silverware, except for bowls and knives and plates, simply what you need to eat. Other than that, you are not allowed to touch, not to move anything. Then Chacham saw, this is the old Alter Rebbe, and the Chacham saw that they started keeping Shabbos a bit better, they've been improved. So then they said that any kelet malach leheter can be used for gufer and mekaymei. Then when they improved even more, they said, okay, the kli malach leheter could be used even for the keli itself, to take it out of the sun, the rain, etc., not to be stolen. But l'talto shalei l'tzedach klal, the Alter Rebbe says the Chachamim never got together and they never undid that gzeira. The gzeira originally covered everything. They undid l'tzedach guf l'tzedach mekaymei. They undid l'tzedach hakli atzmai. They never undid shalei l'tzedach. So since Nechemia ben Chachaliah, it's been usher to carry any keli shalei l'tzedach. And Alter Rebbe goes on and says, but that's all talking about kelim. Obviously, food and drink that are mutter on Shabbos, or svarim that you're allowed to read, that you're allowed to carry even shalei l'tzedach klal, because the gzeir in the time of Nechemia was only for kelim, not for food and svarim. So even if we're following what happened in the time of Nechemia, nothing happened in the time of Nechemia with eichel and mashkin.
What if the keli is blocking you? You can't see somebody. You just
Well,
want.
that's not the loy l'tzoyda.
Maybe it's l'tzedach mekaymei. It could be a form of l'tzedach mekaymei. Where it is right now is blocking. You need to want to empty that space, so it could be okay.
That's all.
Yeah.
So that's how the Alter Rebbe explains this whole issue by Hilchos over there in Siman Shin Ches. Alter Rebbe adds one thing there. Alter Rebbe says that a person is allowed to carry a knife with him, even if he's going to shul where there's an Erev, even if he doesn't need a knife in shul, because he'll need it later in the day When we say tiltul shaloy tzarech, it means that you're not going to need it at all the whole Shabbos. But if you're going to need it later on Shabbos and you're carrying it along with you to have it ready, so that's considered tiltul tzarech. So that is not prohibited. So that is just to expand on the three gedarim and the shaloy tzarech klal. Look, you're not allowed to. Halacha hey. Example of a kli shemalach le'isser. So v'chem metaltal hu arei chaymai machteshas. So you're carrying the grinds, the mill.
It's also going to be the mortar and pestle.
That we might mention that later. The machteshas, a grinder.
Yeah.
So these two items that we mentioned earlier as examples of kli shemalach le'isser, you are allowed to carry them on Shabbos. L'shaber aleh goizim. To use them for a bit of a different use, and we'll see more on that in Halacha Zayin. So you're using it to break nuts against it, or to use it to climb up to a bed.
The only one we have similar to that today, the grinder, is the pepper mill.
Mm-hmm.
That's still used today. That's
right.
It's a very ancient tool.
Right. So that's something that's machtel iser. But if you have another use for it, that's the tzarech gufay.
You need to say that mitzat achila.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to grind fresh pepper on a rice, on food.
Oh, okay.
So then you're allowed to use it.
You have to be careful. You have to make sure you're not doing teichin.
You don't grind fresh pepper on Shabbos.
For purpose of eating, it's
Yeah,
the same thing with squeezing lemons.
I don't know if it's the same.
You have to be careful which thing is mutter for achila and which thing is not. Obviously,
but you're allowed to do it.
I don't think that.
Right. I have to double check, but obviously all the malachas from lush and on are all for achila. Some things are mutter for achila, and some things are not from lush, from teichin and on. Some of them are for they're all to prepare food. Some things are mutter, some things are not.
So what would permit schita?
Well, that's dash. Dash is from earlier. So dash is not directly for food. So if it's directly for food, it might be okay. But even better depends, right? So you have to look it up. You have to look up those individual halachas. So in this case, so you're using the rechayim the machteshas for to break nuts or to climb up on it to just that kind of way. Gufay, or to sit in that space. Aval. In this case, this is le'isser, so ain't metal kadesh le'tishaver, or kadesh le'tigon. If you can't carry it for its own sake, so that it shouldn't break, it shouldn't be so mechain kol kayetz b'zeh. So the Maggid Mishnah writes regarding halacha hey that Mefarshim they say that if you're already carrying a kli shemalach le'isser for the right reason, we don't say that you needed it. Let's say the object was in your way, you wanted to get it out of your way. So we don't say that, the second you got it out of the spot where it's bothering you, you have to drop it right away. No, once you picked it up, you can keep on carrying it and deposit it wherever you want. And there's rayas, and that's the ikar. So you look at Alter Rebbe as well. Alter Rebbe writes in Simon Shem Chas and Halacha Yud Beis that a kli shemalach le'isser, you can use it to gufay. Either to use it directly as a tool for a davar mutter, or to just lean things on it, or the tzarech mekaymai, or the tzarech the kli itself, you're not allowed to. And then the Alter Rebbe adds that if you're carrying it, you don't have to drop it right away. You can put it wherever you want, because once you have it in your hand, you can keep carrying it further. And the Alter Rebbe says, even if you forgot and you took true muktzah, something you're not allowed to pick up, once you're holding it, you're allowed to carry wherever you want in the house. And some say it's not the case with the real muktzah. And it's better to be cheshish to what he says, unless it's an issue of hefsid. Halacha vav. So that we learned about kli shemalach leheter, we learned about kli shemalach le'isser, and now we're going to move on to something which is even more chamer, something that's not a kli at all. So b'chol she'ein kli, if it's not a tool, it's not an implement, you don't use it for a particular thing. Again, avanim umayis v'kanim v'kaydes v'chayetz behen. Also the taltlan, stones, money, rods, beams, things like that, you're not allowed to carry them at all. And the way the Alter Rebbe says it there in Shulchan Aruch is that if it doesn't have a teidas keli and it's not edible, and the Alter Rebbe gives more examples: stones, money, wood, rods, beams, dirt, sand, flour, dough. Dafka of a yid, of a goy, maybe it's okay. And more things that Rambam himself is going to mention later in this halacha: a dead person, an animal. Even if you could conceivably come up with a tashmish hamutta, you say, I'm going to use it. Let's say I came up with a way to use it. I'm going to use the stone to open a goyzim, right? That worked for a klisha malach delis, or what kind of? No, it doesn't have a keli. You're not allowed to carry them, even the tzedach gufim u'makayim. That's called, the Alter Rebbe calls it muktzah machmas gufay. The Rambam continues, Evan Gedolah, Kreida Gedolah, if you have a large stone or a large beam, even if you need 10 people to pick it up, it doesn't matter how big it is. If it could be considered a keli, you're allowed to carry it. And this comes from the Gemara. The Gemara says, Hahu Sharisa, there was a large cross beam in the house of Rabbi, and 10 people had to pick it up, and then they would place it against the door for security. That's how they locked the door. And the Rabbi wouldn't tell. It literally happened. 10 people came and slapped it, and Rabbi wouldn't say anything because he said, "Teiras kli aleha." Rashi says it's a kli because you could sit on it, so it has a function. Use it as a bench. So it's a teiras kli. So he didn't comment, and the fact that it was 10 people wasn't a factor in the market.
Sit on a bunny.
Apparently not. Depends what kind of eben it is. And then another example says there was an asisa, a mortar that was in the house of Mar Shmuel, and it was the size of a kur. That it was a tremendous size. And Mar Shmuel said you can also put it against the door. That's more obvious. It is taka keli. It's just very big. And the Maggid Mishnah says that some of Farshim ask that in the Gemara has a discussion about kaveres, a beehive, and there it says that if it's 3 core, if it's that big, it's a machlekes if you can carry it. If it's 4 core, then they all agree it's usher. So it sounds like things that are extremely big, at some point you can't carry them. And Taisvis there said, this is all from the Rashi, Taisvis is saying that kaveres, you don't really carry a kaveras at all, and if it's so big, so you can't carry it. But a kaira, it was something they always used to carry to close the doors. So if it has a keli and it's something you carry, so that's what the Rashba says. But from the Rambam doesn't mention the kaveras at all. So it sounds like that the Rambam holds that if also doesn't mention it, that the halach, that those who said there was a problem with tiltul for the kaveras are at odds with the other Gemara, and therefore the halach is not like them, and you can carry anything. And as long as it's a keli. Looking at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch there, Alter Rebbe says that Alter Rebbe just says bestam that if it has a teiras kli, even if it's very big and very heavy, it doesn't lose the shem kli, not due to the size, not due to the weight. Even if it's 10 people, if it has a teiras kli and you're going to use it, it was set aside for a certain use, you're allowed to carry on Shabbos. If I turn in this halacha, dalsis habayis, the doors of the house, al b'shein kelim, even though they are considered a keli, lehuchnu letiltul, but they were not intended for carrying, they were attached to the house. So therefore, if they got disconnected even on Shabbos, so then you're not allowed to carry them. And the Maggid Mishnah says that the Gemara there says that lefisha einon min hamuchan. What does lefisha einon min hamuchan mean? So the Rambam here just said lehuchnu letiltul. They are kalim, but they weren't prepared for tiltul. Rashi there says einon min hamuchan because they're not a keli. So Rashi and Rambam are understanding that differently. Looking at Alter Rebbe says first Alter Rebbe brings the halacha of doors and other objects that we're going to have later in the Rambam and halacha Yud Beis. The way Alter Rebbe says it there, which we'll see later in halacha Yud Beis, that you are allowed to carry the doors of kalim because they always had a shem kli. The Alter Rebbe says because the object itself is a keli and the door is attached to it, so the door is also a keli. And even if it falls off, it doesn't lose the title of a keli. But the Alter Rebbe says, hey, the doors of the house, they taka never were a keli. The Alter Rebbe goes with Rashi. And even though once they got disconnected, now you'd be able to use them like a board, like a beam for something. But not mutter but tiltul.
What's the rationale to clear them not a keli?
The flashlight.
It's just a thing attached to the house. Doesn't serve as an independent tool or implement for something.
So according to ones that hold that it is a keli, so it does serve as an independent
tool. They have a different definition. Yeah, clearly this is the gray area of the definition of a keli. All right. Other examples
What
of
if you just touch the ground? Is that
so touching.
is it a carrying?
Touching is not a problem. I don't know if I have the Alter Rebbe here about it or not, but the touching is not a problem.
in general in any muktzah.
Yeah, it's not. That's a. I guess you could say it's a myth that is a problem touching
Like
muktzah.
touching a car, whatever.
Yeah, you could touch anything that's muktzah.
What is the problem with Mugzah?
Tiltul.
Specifically in the way that the Rambam has been framing it about carrying it, all about tiltul. So and dirt and sand and a dead body, you're not to move them from their place. Uben shmeina chai, and an 8-month child, which is considered not a child, it's not something that will survive. So even if it's alive, it's like a stone. You may recall we had in Hilchos Mila that Rambam elaborated a bit more. Mishnel b'chedesh hashmini. So if the child is born and looks complete, looks proper, so then we just say it's a ben shiva that came out late, then you can carry him on Shabbos. Ve'ena ke'evan. That was what the Rambam said there. You can give him a bris on Shabbos. But if the child looks deformed, like he's not fully developed, so that's the ben shmeina we're talking about. He really was supposed to be born in the 9th month. He was born prematurely. Chashav ke'evan v'asar l'taltloi, and then if 30 days pass and he survives, so then he survived. The Maggid Mishnah here mentions
this is taking place in a hospital anyway. I mean, so you're going to put that issue on a doctor or a nurse?
Well, nowadays the premature child would be ways to save him anyway. Back then there was nothing you could do.
There's nothing they can do.
The Maggid Mishnah notes that when it says in Gemara that a ben shmeina is ke'evan, it says the mother is allowed to lean over and nurse the child without moving him. Sakana. Rashi says it's a sakana for the mother. She needs to relieve the stress of the milk. If she doesn't, it'll make her sick. So for that reason, the mother could nurse, but without by leaning over the child. Halacha Zayin. Yeah.
Here's a little infant, and we can't even touch it.
Right.
But today it's a whole different story.
Yeah, not relevant to today. Not really. Halacha Zayin. So now we're defining, when we say l'tzeirach gufa, we don't mean just purely for the usual thing the object is used for, but for anything. Allah says by malacha shlei nas l'sham, even to do a malacha that was not made for. A hammer to crack nuts, a hatchet to cut a dry fig, megera lagerba a sagvina, a saw to cut cheese, a rake to collect dried figs, a cotton, a winnowing shovel, a pitchfork. You're feeding your child with it. So it seems absurd, but you're using it for something. As a kush v'sakadke litchev by a spindle or the weaver's shuttle. These are certain sharp objects that you're using it to pierce something with, to push something with. Machat shel sakoyin leftoach bayas hadelas, the needle of a sack maker to open the door, to pick a lock. As a machtashas leishavala, or the millstone simply to sit on. So that's a stone, but for sitting, that works for sitting. You can sit on it.
So, these are not called kelim tashmishon lisur?
They are. And you're using them, and you're allowed to use them at Tzedach Gufam, and the Tzedach Gufam includes even.
So what we learned before that it's not mutter.
We said before it is. We said Klisha Machtel Isser L'Tzedach Gufa L'Tzedach Mekayim is mutter, and now we're elaborating. L'Tzedach Gufa includes even things that are obviously not the normal tashmish.
So then a hammer that's usually used for carpentry.
Right.
If you take it to crack a walnut,
it's okay.
Yeah. That's the point.
Yeah, so a lot of leeway there with all kinds of, we're mentioning rakes and pitchforks and saws, and as long as you have a good reason to be using it, the action itself is mutter, you're allowed to do it. Halacha ches, a needle, metal the machat shel yad. A person is allowed to carry a regular sewing needle, hashlema if it's complete, litil be'esakotz, to remove a thorn, a person has in their skin a splinter. Thank you. Avalim nital, so, and it's mutter to remove a splinter on Shabbos as well, obviously. So you're allowed to, that's not a problem, and you're using the needle for that. Avalim nital akatza hanakav shelo, akatza, but if either end, either the hole, the small hole on one side, or the point on the other side is missing, then you can't use it. But if it's still it's a needle that you didn't finish making yet, and you didn't make the hole yet, mutter the tatla, and then in that case, even without the hole, you're allowed to carry it. Like the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, there's a brisa that says that a machash ain't a kuva, you're allowed to carry. The Gemara explains that it's a gomi, the ones that are gailam that haven't been fully developed. Sometimes you just change your mind. You say, you know what, I'll just keep it like this, and I'll use it for splinters. Halacha tes chisarin kiss. So kol kli shemakbad alav shama yifchasu damav. Kagoyin kelem hamuktzin l'schayna. If it's an item that you really don't want it to be used at all, you're afraid you're going to lose it's going to lose its value. So, for example, you have things that you want to sell, so you don't want to use it, you want to sell it. Or things that are simply very expensive, and you're afraid that any use would ruin it. So then, an antique, it looks like it has a function, but it's not really something you would want to use. Also, the tatlum b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to carry them on Shabbos at all. That it's muktzah because of you're going to lose the money. Hamasar agadol, a large saw, the yasid shel machresha, the sharp point in the plow, the part that actually is sharp. Misakin shel tabachin, a butcher's knife, a chedav shel ushkafim, a knife of someone who works leather, a chatzin hachershim, the hammer or something like that of the carpenter. The kurnas habasam chayetz behen, and the mortar of the people who make perfume or spices. So these are all considered expensive pieces of this is their equipment, expensive equipment, and that's not something they would want. No, you can't use it for their actual use, and you wouldn't want it being used around the house for other uses. So you can't use it. Looking out the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch there. So the Alter Rebbe says either same two things. Either it's for schayra, even if they're not expensive, but you want to sell it, you don't want it to be used, or if it's expensive, so you're not allowed to carry it. Even the tzedach mekaymai, or the tzedach gufa. You said, "Oh, I changed my mind. I figured out something I want to use it for." Now, obviously, the Alter Rebbe says if you change your mind after Shabbos, but if you change your mind before Shabbos, then you've redefined what you use this thing for. Right, all these things. What if you decide I'm not using the saw anymore for my equipment for work? So then you change your mind. But that has to be before Shabbos. And Alter Rebbe says also that includes a knife for shchita or for mila and things like that. Even though technically it's just a knife, but a shaychit wouldn't want his knife being used for ordinary uses around the house on Shabbos. Yeah. So it has a tashmish hamutar, but a shaychit doesn't want it to be used for the tashmish hamutar. Not in mine. So that's something that you're not allowed to. And then the Alter Rebbe goes into even if it's in its sheath along with other knives. We don't say, "Oh, it looks like he stuck it with the other knives, so maybe he doesn't care about it as much." No, we still think the second shel shchita or these other knives are too precious to be used for other things. And then Alter Rebbe gets into whether you can take the other knives, even if you're moving this one, which the Rambam himself is going to get into later, moving things that are mutter along with things that are aser. Also, when it comes to the mortar for the perfume, Alter Rebbe says it all depends really on the person. What is he? Someone who's makbid and says you can't use it for anything else. I'm very careful. If you're not makbid, then changes. So it's a bit subjective. Also, the Alter Rebbe gives an example of paper. Back then, paper was more of a precious commodity. And he had blank paper to use for writing. It was muktzah machmas chsaron kiss because you can't just use the paper around the house for other things. Don't touch my paper. I need my paper. Wow. But nowadays, probably lavdafka. Paper isn't chsaron kiss. You don't care if you lose the paper. So it all depends really on the metzias of how you feel about it. Now we move on to halacha yud. So now we're going to learn about, earlier we learned about kli shemalachta l'isser. Now we're going to learn about kli that's machmas isser, different thing. Kol kli shehuktzah machmas isser. If it became muktzah because of an isser that was done with it, Also, the tatle is also completely usher to carry at all. Ner sheliga by Shabbos. So a candle that was lit on Shabbos, the candelabra, the ner was on. The shulchan shahaya of mois, the table has money on it. Avapi shekava ner, shenafla mois. Even after the candle and the money are gone, also the taltlon. It's also to carry them. Shekol klishaya also the taltle ben hashmashis. Nas the taltle kol Shabbos kula. If it was also ben hashmashis, it's also for the Shabbos. Avapi shehalach hadavar shegarim loya iser. Even if the iser itself went away.
Because it's a bus and double usher.
I don't know if that's the main point here. Like he said, the ner itself and the menorah, so it could be the menorah itself ends up being more of a basis, but that wasn't the main. I don't think that was the main point being made here. Just the idea of that's mukta machmas iser. If you look in the Maggid Mishnah, the Maggid Mishnah points out that this is the din dafka if you put it there. But if you forgot it there, that's a different halacha that we're going to get to in this Perek. He also points out that the Ramban and the Rashba hold that you can make a Tanai with a Ner. That if you make a Tanai from Erev Shabbos, that after it goes out, you'll be able to carry it. The Tanai does work. We're not going to get into that, whether that works halacha or not. Because the Mishnah also points out that from the Rambam Kumtois, that if it's machmas iser, you're not allowed to carry it at all. Even the tzedek guf and tzedek makim, that's what also the tatle means. Just like in halacha tes, machmas chisar and kiss, or in the halacha vav, all these halachas are also tatle completely. Because there is another issue who said otherwise. So the Kesef Mishnah is making a point of emphasizing we're saying it's also tatle at all. And it says, it also goes according to Ben Hashmashis. A klisha malach de l'isser, a regular klisha malach de l'isser wasn't, nothing happened to Ben Hashmashis. You're always allowed to carry l'tzedek guf and l'tzedek mekayimei. But ner, Ben Hashmashis, it was also to carry it. So that stays the whole Shabbos. And he mentions that if it's on top of something else, so then it's a basel davar aser. Allah chayirah have a kliya muktzah machmas mios. But if it's muktzah because it's discussing ner yoshin shal neft, an old kerosene lamp, or kliyat soya, a chamber pot, v'chayetze behen, so that's mutter l'taltel b'Shabbos and mutter chalahen. That's like the previous examples, like klishim lach del iser. You're allowed to carry it on Shabbos if you need it for something. Allah yud beis. The other doors, the doors on furniture, not on the house. Kol hakelim hanitolim b'Shabbos shnesparku dalsei saying any kli that is you're allowed to move around on its own right on Shabbos, and the door falls off. I mean, Dalsas Tevel and Migdal, chest, things like that. Ben Shadisparku b'Shabbos, Ben Shadisparku Kaidem Shabbos, whether it happened on Shabbos or it fell off before Shabbos. Mutter l'taltel eis and Dalsas, you're allowed to carry them. Chenan kol hakem nitolim b'Shabbos shenishbru, Ben Kaidem Shabbos, Ben b'Shabbos, shevrehen nitalin v'shiyu eisen me'ein malacha. And any keli that you're allowed to carry on Shabbos that broke, whether before or on Shabbos, you're allowed to carry the pieces around as well, as long as they still serve some kind of function. Ketzad, shivri arei v'lachasas benes bi'achavis. You have a big earthen bowl that broke, but now you can use it to cover the barrel. Shivri schuchas l'chasas benes bi'apach. Broken glass, you can cover a jug. V'chen kol kayetzu b'zeh a picture of ein hashvarim nu'in l'malacha klal. Also talking, but if the shards are not usable for anything, then it would be usher to carry them. Halacha yud gimel. The covers of kalim, so the Ram says, "Kol kisuya kalim nitolim b'Shabbos." All covers of kalim can be taken and carried on Shabbos. V'shiesh teidas kli alein, as long as there's a teidas kli. So either, as we're going to see, either the keli itself is considered a keli, and then the cover is an extension of that, or if it doesn't cover a keli, then the cover itself has to be considered a keli in its own right. So the Ram says, "Hayakli mechuber b'karka." If the kli was attached to the earth, it's like a barrel that's in the earth. So then there's no real kli here in its own right. There's no kli. The cover is sort of just on its own. So the cover itself has to have a handle. If the cover has a handle, then then you can carry it. Then it's not a keli. You can't carry it. So that's if the barrel is in the earth. What if there is no barrel? If it's just a hole? If it's a cover over a manhole cover, something like that. And various holes and things like that in the ground. Again, you can't carry the cover. You can't carry it unless it has its own handle. because it didn't get the kli, it didn't become a kli from what it covers. Now, by the way, when the Rambam says you can carry this cover over the whole of the ground, you have to remember that earlier in Halacha Perek Yud, the Rambam said that you're not allowed to actually put a cover back on the ground on Shabbos because that's baina. So we're not talking about actually putting it back in its place. We're just talking about moving it around. So if it has a handle, you can move it around. So a manhole cover doesn't have a handle, for example. That would be a case where it's not covering a keli and it doesn't have a handle. It's not its own keli. You wouldn't be able to move that on Shabbos. But ksuya tanner, the cover of an oven, if it doesn't have a handle, you are allowed to carry it because the tanner itself is a keli. It's not in the earth, so that's not a problem. Now,
so if it doesn't have a handle,
because the oven itself is a keli, and this is the cover of that keli, so then the cover doesn't. If the cover is of a keli, just a normal keli lying around, then the cover itself doesn't need to be a keli in its own right. It's like the door to something, the cover to something. Halacha Yudalad. Now we're going to move on to what if you have two things together. One is asur to move, one is mutter. What do you do? One is asur, one is mutter. They're next to each other, or on each other, or in each other. By carrying one, you're going to carry the other. If you need the thing that you're allowed to move, then you're allowed to move it, even if you're thereby moving the other thing as well. And if you needed to move the thing that's asur, you can't. Then you can't do it. If you're moving the davar hamutter and the davar asur is on top of it, that's one thing. But if you want to move the davar asur and you say, I'll pick up the davar hamutter under it, and that thereby I'll carry the davar asur, no, that you can't do. Halachat Vav Ketzad Paga Shahisa Tmuna Bateven. You have an unripe fig that's in the straw to ripen. Or you have some kind of cake that's on the coals. So you're allowed to pierce them with, actually we mentioned earlier, the kush and the kadked as something that's malach delisser, but if you're using it for the right purpose, something sharp, you pierce them and you pick them up. Even though you're pushing around the straw and the coals, and those are not a keli, it's also to be metaltal. We don't mind, we don't care. So you had turnip or radish that's in the earth, and then the leaves are sticking out. Some of the leaves are sticking out. So you're allowed to pull them out you have to make sure that
you don't tear it. Not
doing kaitzer or something like that. But if the issue is just that the earth is being moved, then it's not a problem. Even if the earth is being pushed. But if you have something that you want to move on top of a stone, on top of a beam, you can't say, I'm moving the stone because there's a child on it. That's not a good excuse. Unless you actually want to move the child on the stone, then that's okay. Halacha Tes Zayin. A man can pick up his child who wants his father, misses his father, and wants to be held, even if he's holding a stone, but not if he's holding a coin. Because if the coin falls, we're concerned the father's going to want to take it. There's a basket that had a hole and it was closed with a stone. You're allowed to carry the basket. From the stone has now become part of the basket. If there's fruit in the basket and there's a stone mixed in with the fruit, if the fruit are moist, the type of pears that are moist, like grapes or berries, so then you just pick up the whole basket with the stone. Because if you try shaking the stone out in this case, all the fruit are going to fall into the earth and get dirty. And it's going to ruin these types of fruits. It's not going to look good. It's not going to be good. If it's going to cause a loss, they weren't geyser about the stone, moving the stone. Halacha Yud Zayin. Chavis sheshachach even al piha. If in this case you forgot, right? Earlier we spoke about something that you put deliberately, but if you forgot the davar asur on the chavis, mat al tzida v'hinei felas. So then in that case you are allowed to tip it over on its side and it falls off. Haisa bein achavias, if it was among the barrels, so you can't just tip it over. So the makbil makamacha revenal, you're even allowed to pick it up with the stone on top. So you are in a sense moving the stone. Umata al tzida sham even if felas, and again indirectly let it slide off. Or if you forgot money on the pillow of the car and you need it, you can shake the pillow and it falls off. And if you need the spot where the pillow is, then you can just pick it all up together. But if you left it there deliberately and Erev Shabbos, whether the money or the stone, then you're not allowed to. Then it became a basis, and even if it falls off later, that's where this concept comes in. So kiruya is a kind of a bucket. Farshim say it's a bucket that's actually made out of an old dry sort of pumpkin squash. So imamal, and it's a stone. The stone is there to weigh it down when you're lowering the bucket to draw water. If you're able to lower it and fill it and it doesn't fall out, then it's considered part of the bucket, and then the stone isn't a problem on Shabbos. And if not, if it falls out, then you can't touch that bucket with the stone. If you have clothing on top of a pole, and the pole itself is not a keli or whatever, so you can still take the beggar off. Halacha Yotes, peiros that you're not allowed to eat. So peiros also la'achlam, the peiros that are asur, and peiros shenim asar, there's no meiser taken. Even if it's just meiser midrabanan, or you have meiser ishim, you didn't take off the chumas meiser yet. Or truma tmeya. That's tame, so who's eating them exactly? Not the kayin and not the yisrael. Or you have ma'aser shein and you have hekdesh and you didn't convert it to the money properly. So also the taltalon, you're not allowed to carry them because even though they're peiros, but they're also to eat. Avlad mai, where you're not sure if the amar it's separated ma'aser however since it is mutter for poor people to eat the mai. Or in the case of Ma'aser and Hekdesh, where you already converted it to money, you just didn't add the extra fifth, mutter l'taltalan, it is mutter. Halacha chaf. Truma. Taltal Yisrael truma, the truma itself, that's not tameh, that is tahar. A yid, a Yisrael who's not a kohen, is allowed to carry it, even though he is not allowed to eat it. And if the truma that's tummy, which you said before you can't carry, is together with the tahira or with chulin, regular fruit. In a kli, you're allowed to carry the whole kli. Like before, like we said earlier with the stone and the fruit. If the thing that's tar is on the bottom, and if you were to shake it, while you have paid some from the karka, sheminar is you postu that if you try shaking it, it's going to fall on the earth and it's going to get ruined. So then you can carry it. But if it's just nuts and almonds and things like that, so first shake the whole kli out, and then take the thing that is mutter to carry, and leave the tongue which you can't carry. And if it was a tzarech mekayimai, it doesn't matter what the setup is, you can just move the whole thing away. You don't have to first get the tummy thing out.
And I guess the same thing by truma shel.
Yeah, halacha chavav. Marbech shel avanim shechashav olav b'yidiyim. So you have a bunch of stones, a pile of stones. Now stones we know are not a kli, they're muktzah, but if you want to use the stone specifically for sitting, and you had it and you thought about it before Shabbos, so im limdum, if you also did an act and you organized them for sitting, mutar leishav alayim lamach, then you can sit on them the next day. Otherwise, usher. So it sounds like you have to take an action. You have to think about it and do an action. You have branches of a date palm that you were going to use for firewood. Before Shabbos, you thought, instead I'll sit on them. You're allowed to carry them. And here it sounds like just thinking alone. Or if you did an act, if you sat on them in Erev Shabbos, then you're allowed to carry them. So the Maggid Mishnah says, the Nidbach is actually a story in the Gemara. It says, Pamachas halach Rabbi. Rabbi once went somewhere and there was this nidbach shel avonim, nidbach, marbech. And he told his talmidim, let's think about it so we can sit on it tomorrow. And the Gemara discusses, is it just thinking or do you need a maisa? And some say, he said, no, tzu ve limdum, what the Rambam said here, limdum, to be masad with them. And then the Chariz Shel Dakel, there it's not a story, it's just a machlekes, whether you need to do an action or whether you don't need to do an action. And machlekes tanoim, machlekes amiroim. And it sounds like, so now the question is, why did the Rambam paskin earlier that you need a maisa? And here it sounds like the Rambam paskin, like the ones who hold you don't need a maisa with the date palm. So the Maggid Mishnah says, I think that there's a difference. When it comes to the charayas, when it comes to the branches of the date palm, some use it for sitting and some use it for wood. So the only reason why it would be aser is because you thought the wrong thing. You thought I want to use it for wood, so then you changed that, you fixed that by thinking the other thing. But when it comes to the marbech or the nidbach shel avonim, it's not really used for sitting. So if you want to use it for sitting, then you have to take an action to prove that this is being used for sitting. The Kesef Mishnah has his own take on it. That's that. Halacha chav beis. Hakasha alamita lo yinanoi biyada. If you have straw in a bed, so straw is also muktzah because it's not a keli. And now you suddenly want to straighten it out to sleep on. You can't use your hand. Al manane begufa, but you can lie down and sort of straighten it out with your body. But if it was edible, it was for food for an animal, the mutla totally has a use. Food, we said b'chalal. Food is not a problem on Shabbos. Or if there's a pillow or a sheet over it, then you are allowed to touch the straw with your hand. That's like the previous halacha, sitting on it from Erev Shabbos. You did an action that showed that you wanted to use it as a mattress on Shabbos. If you bring a box of dirt into your house, if you set aside a particular corner in Erev Shabbos, then you can carry it on Shabbos and use it for what you need, because also you indicated that this is a box of dirt that you plan on using.
Are you allowed to shake the sheet while the kash is on the sheet? I guess there's no problem.
Well, we said if there's a sheet that shows that you planned on using it as a mattress, so then there's no problem at all.
There's a sheet and you found straw on the sheet on Shabbos. Are you allowed to just shake it off
Or on a tablecloth.
Or on a tablecloth?
I think that's like examples that we said. If there's if shachach, if you didn't leave it there on purpose, it's like an evan on a chavis. You want to shake the evan off the chavis, you can do that.
Or if you have money in your coat pocket,
right?
Something like that.
And it wasn't bedafka, yeah. Halacha chav gimel. Also levato kli me'achenai. So this is another din, that if you have a kli that you are able to use as a keli, you're not allowed to put it out of commission. So that's like destroying, breaking something. We mentioned this much earlier as well. Yeah. You're not allowed to put a kli under the fire, under a lamp on Shabbos to catch the oil that's dripping. The shaman, the oil is part of the ner, that itself is also. When it falls into the bowl, then you also tilt the kli mutter. Then you're turning the kli, which was mutter, into something that's awesome. You're not allowed to do that. So you also can't catch the egg of the chicken with the bowl, because that egg is also aser, and it's going to make the bowl aser. But if the egg fell on the ground, then you can take the bowl and put it on top and cover it on top, because you can always take the keli away. It's just lying on the floor. It happens to be covering something. And you can do that for anything that's aser. If there's something aser and move your house and it's bothering you, you can put something over it. You didn't do anything to the keli. You can always take it away.
So it seems like this is mitzat seiser.
Yeah, that's what the Rambam says.
Although we learned much earlier, the seiser is really not a problem of its own. It's
the tzedek.
It has to be tzedek.
So he's being seisered for a purpose. Now the Rabbi over here says, as long as you don't touch the egg. And the Maggid Mishnah says, you're not allowed to touch muktzah and noila. You're allowed to touch. So he says, after that, maybe the concern here was of the Ravid that if you touch it, then you probably will move it. So that's why you should avoid touching it. But generally, it's not a problem to touch.
Also, the bait says it's a round thing. You touch it, it moves automatically.
No. It's more
It's a
susceptible.
round thing.
It's,
It's not
right.
like a stationary.
Exactly.
Thing.
Yeah, very good. Halacha Chav Daled, Nois and Kli Tachas Hadelef. If you have a leak and there's water dripping, you could put a bucket there or something to catch the water. And if it fills up, you can just pour it out and do it again. You don't have to stay away. As long as the water is somewhat usable for washing. But if it's not, then you shouldn't put it there. Because it's the same concept of Nasan. But if you put it there, then you are allowed to carry it with the dirty water, because I guess the water has some use for something, perhaps. And then that's a reason that goes back to the previous din, that you're not allowed. Really, you shouldn't be creating a new chamber pot on Shabbos by putting the schmutz inside. That's really the problem. But if you already did, then you can carry it. Halacha Chavhei. You have a barrel of tevel that broke. Maybe you are allowed to catch the tevel inside. We said before that it's Perek Sha'asa La'achlan, so then why are we allowed to put a keli there? However, we learned earlier that what's the whole reason you're not allowed to do Trumas HaMaisis on Shabbos? It's just a gzeira, and if you go ahead and do it, the Trumas HaMaisis, it did have the effect, it is metakin it, so because you have the ability to metakin tevel, you can put the keli there. But nice and you can put a kli just to catch the sparks, because they're not any real substance, and then you can move the keli afterwards, because it didn't really catch anything. The beam broke, and same basefel, so you can't. You want to sort of the beam is tipping. You want to support the beam with something. You can only support it with something if there's space and you're able to take them away, just like with the bowl on top of the egg. If it's not actually somehow. There is some space there. Because if it actually is leaning on it, then you cause this problem. Person and you're allowed to put a match or something like that, straw over stones or over a beehive in the sun for the sun, or the rain for the rain. Eventually, it's as long as you're not doing a different problem of tzad by covering the bees. You can always take away whenever you want. And you're allowed to turn over a basket for the small chicks to go up and down. Because you're not being mevatel, you can take it away once they walk away. Final halacha. Fell into a hole, or if you can help it and let it deal, give it the food or whatever. So then you can do that till Matzah Shabbos. Maybe so you bring pillows and blankets, you put it under it. Also, then if it goes up on its own, if it's able to use that to go up, it went up. You're essentially putting it under an animal, and we said earlier about chai is one of the things that are not a keli and they're muktzah, and now you're putting it under that, the Baal Chai, so weren't you mevatel kli me'echenai? So, or actually, the Rambam says, or it's going to be in the water, because of the pain of the animals, but then you're not to take it out. You're not allowed to really pick up an animal. But you can push them. And you can help young calves or young horses. You can help them walk if they're walking on their own like a child. If a chicken ran away, a hen ran away, you're not allowed to help it walk. Because it sort of runs out of your hand, and its limbs, its wings, or whatever, somehow it's getting plucked. But you can push it.
So how are you allowed to touch the behemoth?